Hi, this is Michelle Beckham-Corbin, president of C3 Creating Connections Consulting, a social media marketing firm.
And I'm Mark Macomber, president of Macomber Creations, and welcome to episode 22 of Digitally Speaking.
I like that, 22. We get the kind of the double fingers going on there. Mark, I wanted to share with our viewers a little bit about our last episode, which was episode 21. And that episode was on Reddit, and we had a guest in our studio that day. And actually we had a digital native, and a digital native is someone who literally grew up with social media. And so we had Cameron Corbin, a junior political science student at University of Cincinnati, and Cameron came in and provided kind of that expert lens on Reddit and how it's used and how he specifically uses it for his classes at UC. And I got to tell you, I watched that show and I was amazed at the amount of knowledge he had on Reddit and the amount of time he spent on Reddit too.
He did, and that was an amazing statistic to me too. How much time that kids get wrapped up in these programs. Reddit was a very, very interesting platform.
Yeah, great source of all kinds of news. But today we're going to kind of switch gears and talk about Twitter. There have been a lot of changes with Twitter, all great changes, great for businesses, and I want to bring our audience up to speed on some of those. But I thought what we might do, Mark, is kind of take a look back and maybe just discuss a little bit about our personal Twitter journeys and kind of how we got started. Can you remember back to when you first got on Twitter?
Well, Twitter has been interesting to me. It is something that I haven't pursued really heavily because it's just for my particular needs right at the moment. In my business world, it hasn't been a real high demand application for me. However, there are folks such as yourself that use it on a very regular basis. So why don't I flip that around to you and you share with me from a professional standpoint. I really think it's interesting because I think that's where Twitter has the most appeal, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, it can be used as a social application, but the business application is something that I think is interesting to explore.
Yeah, and I think Twitter's really changed over the years from when it was first introduced. I can recall I used to be part of a group called New Media Cincinnati. The group no longer is in existence anymore, but this was in the early days of social media, and this networking group would get together on Saturday afternoons and talk about all of the latest and greatest things as they were coming out. And it was a great place to not only network with people that were kind of in the industry or trying to get into that industry as it was blossoming, but it was a great place to really learn information. So I remember way back, I want to say in maybe 2007, maybe 2008, attending one of the meetings, and one of the guys that was there had Twitter on his phone, and he was showing it to me, and I had heard of Twitter, read a little bit about it, but I hadn't actually seen it live at that point. And I can remember Cliff just showing me Twitter, and I was thinking, wow, this is so cool from a communication point of view. And so in the early days, for me, Twitter really was a great place to have conversations. It wasn't so, how do I say this? There were the Twitterverse, Twitter sphere, the universe that was Twitter, it is Twitter, was much smaller back then. And so it was very easy to start conversations. I think it's much more difficult today because there are just the mass number of people and businesses that are on Twitter. But just to give you kind of a fun little story, I want to say this is probably 2008, 2009. I was having a conversation with a woman on Twitter. We used to talk about all kinds of business things. And so one night, maybe around 11 p.m., she kind of tweeted, and this is all public tweets, so not DMs or direct messages. And she said, gosh, I'm in the middle of a storm, summer thunderstorm, and I'm just hearing these big, huge peals of thunder. And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting because and I knew she was in Cincinnati, I should say that. I've got a storm around me too, because remember in the summer, your storms are kind of scattered, right?
Sure.
One part of Cincinnati may have a storm and the west side might not, et cetera. So anyway, we kept on chatting or tweeting to each other, and then she made another comment about the loudest clap of thunder she had ever heard. And I said, wow, I just had the loudest clap of thunder I've ever heard too. And then I said, where do you live? And it turns out that she just lived down the road from me.
Oh, wow.
And so we met on Twitter, and our personalities just clicked, and we said, you know what, we've got to take this, which everybody should do no matter where you meet on social media, to get out there and meet in real life. So we had lunch and just really hit it off, and that friendship turned into kind of a business relationship. She invited me to be part of the group Authentic Leadership Cincinnati, which was a LinkedIn group, which later again, went out into real world and became a real meeting group with folks coming together to hear about leadership. And then we turned that group into a nonprofit, to a 501c3, and I ended up being on the board. So from that conversation about thunder and lightning, a great friendship with Aaron Schreier developed, and and then a relationship working on leadership for Cincinnati with Aaron by being a board member. So,
well, and that was the thing that was interesting to me in my first assessment of Twitter, was that it really became kind of a more exaggerated when computers developed. And first we had private messenger, and then all of a sudden, we had emails, but that became antiquated when everyone had a device and a phone and things that were able to now communicate. Twitter became the application that everybody used for real-time communication. And I think that has burgeoned now into everything. I mean, when you watch a TV show and you want to vote or you want to tweet, perfect example is some of these shows that are on. I don't know if I should be able to say the name of one of the shows, but say one of the musical performance shows.
American Idol.
Well, the one I was going to quote was The Voice.
Oh yeah.
Because it's my favorite for a lot of reasons, but that's how they're voting. And they're voting. You get 10 minutes to vote for the top 10, and everybody else's, and you get 10 minutes to cast your votes. That was it. In the old days, you phone your votes in, pay for your number, you had to pay $1 or $2 to vote. Now you vote, it happens fast, quick. Poor guys that are no longer in the show are gone in 10 minutes, and now all of a sudden you have the final contestants. But again, that acceleration that we talk about all the time due to digital media, and so that's the interesting thing to me about Twitter, and in the manner of communications and being able to form groups, and with the hashtags that you define things, and it's pretty interesting, and it still seems to be holding pretty solid as a good solid form of communication to folks. Yeah,
and actually, so that kind of segues right into what's new. Someone, let me go down into my notes here, a guy by the name of Dan Zarella did a study recently on Twitter data and found that his research showed that conversations are not necessarily the best thing to have on Twitter. He in his findings, because I've seen some people who have refuted that and have a different opinion, but in his particular study, he was showing that the Twitter accounts with the most followers were the ones that were engaged in conversation less frequently. So what they were doing was really tweeting out content, and that people were then following them for the content, and not the conversation about the thunderstorm. Right. So I think that the people who are saying, well, I don't know if I go with that, I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, right? You can't be completely conversational. You can't just be someone who is just, throwing out content.
It's not a blog either. You only get a limited space to put your content. So I think that's the other thing. You get a certain limitation as to what you can actually put on it, but it still seems to be holding in there as being a viable.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think kind of where the bridge between the two sides of that particular issue are is finding who the influencers are on Twitter. And boy, if you can develop a relationship with those influencers, which obviously it's got to be some kind of conversations going on back and forth, right? So if you can develop that relationship and have an influencer share your content, share your tweets, boy, that just opens you up to a much larger audience, much larger audience. So another group did some research, BuzzSumo, and they basically found that when influencers share your content, the reach increases substantially. So they said that if one influencer shares one piece of content, it will get almost 40% more social shares by having that little extra boost. So that kind of, you know, shows you that you got to build those relationships with influencers. So one of the things that came out, not so new, I want to say it's been almost 16, 18 months, but new in the sense that I think more people are using it, are Twitter cards. So Twitter cards, and I've got a little bit of information on that. There are 7 different types of Twitter cards. So this is kind of content that you can add to your tweets. And the card types include gallery cards that will feature multiple images. I don't know if you've seen on Twitter that people can now share a tweet, that's got the multiple images. A single photo card, so just one big image. Summary cards, which let you post a link with more information, maybe a link back to your website. Summary cards with images. So the summary card would also have, you know, summary information about your business. An app card, a player card, which will actually showcase a video, and product cards. So again, if you've got a product, a great way to kind of share the attributes of that product. So if you go just kind of Google Twitter cards, there are a lot of blogs out there that will walk you through the process of creating the HTML code to be able to add some of this information to your website too. So additionally, as far as other new things that are going on, we've had pinned tweets for a long time, very similar to Facebook, where you can pin a Facebook post to the top of the timeline. So you can do the same thing on Twitter. And with the Twitter cards, I thought this was just a fabulous suggestion. You can use a Twitter card, again, to have that link to your, whatever it is that you want to give away. Let's say it's more content, let's say it's some type of a freebie or a discount, but you would use this card in the same way that people use feature boxes on their website. You know, put your email in and we will send you X, Y, and Z, right? So you create that with a Twitter card, but then you pin it to the top of your Twitter feed, and so it acts kind of like that little special feature box on a website, but it's on your Twitter account. So I thought that was really, really brilliant.
Well, what's interesting too is that with all these applications, everything has become so amalgamous, where applications are starting to morph from others, taking pieces from other applications into how they work. My perfect example was Facebook started one way. LinkedIn was very, very perfunctory when it started out, and all of a sudden it starts to appear like Facebook, and then it goes into a totally different direction. And it's interesting how they're all kind of picking and somewhat plagiarizing each other and taking the best, and like, as I say, it becomes this amalgamated application where they're picking pieces from other applications and they're just turning into these new, and they'll probably continue to morph like that ad infinitum, because it's just the way social media is developing and what the needs are and what's going on. In fact, as you were talking about Twitter and you were talking about all the different cards that are available, I started likening it to it like a sports, it's going to become a game. It's sports. How many, you know, how do we score? How do we score this? And as the influencers are getting better and better, hey, you know, how do we rate this? How do we tie in a statistic to this? And essentially that's going on anyway to some degree, but whether actually somebody actually says, hey, let's just make a real game out of this and be done with it, and figure out who's the top scorer and who the most influential are. And it's,
well, and that's all part of marketing strategy, which is totally what I'm all about.
And it's kind of about the whole social media game, because that's what it is all about. Whether you're in business or whether it's just a personal fun sport for you, if you will. to be able to gain followers, to be able to gain people that will look at your product if you're in business, or look at your services, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's, again, the thing that we always constantly tie in here at this show is how applicable is this in your life, in your personal life, in your business life, to use these platforms to benefit you professionally and or personally, because often they're again amalgamous, they're integrated.
Intertwined, yeah.
So just all great stuff and tools, and certainly we can find ourselves slaves to all the stuff, and as we had in our last guest,
back to the 2 to 3 hours.
I'm
right?
still stunned at the amount of time. I'm going, where did you find time to? But I totally understand as a student, someone in political science, and you have to be up on all the latest and greatest information, and if it's part of the educational process, and you need to get information to, whether you're writing papers or doing thesis or whatever you're doing, it's a great way to really consolidate all this stuff and get it customized.
Right. The
and that's the big
information that you want.
It is, and that's why all these tools are so important. And of course, they have applications that help you manage all this stuff as well.
Right.
So,
well, the thing that I was fascinated with him was the fact that I don't know if you recall, he was talking about how he really had 2 screens going.
Mm-hmm.
He had his laptop and then kind of the big screen, and kind
Sure.
of was, multitasking
sure.
and moving, handling both at the same time.
Absolutely.
But what you're saying, though, about managing, I did want to bring up another tool. See if I can find the information. It is it's not going to be open to everybody, but it is a tool that will be useful for media publishers. Mm-hmm. And it is called Curator. And so basically, Twitter is using Curator for publishing folks. And so let me just kind of say who they're talking about. So they're talking about news organizations, production companies, broadcasters, local governments, concert venues. So that's kind of the target for using this tool. But what it will do is it will curate all of the tweets on your particular, they're not calling it a hashtag, but like your event, right? Sure. And then you will have the ability, if you're one of these lucky media outlets, to be able to take all of that content and feature it on your website or wherever you need to feature it. But this tool will pull it all together. So for example, March Madness. So using Curator to pull all of the tweets from teams and fans and coaches and everything, so that people could kind of see the stream of the information.
Interesting. So they categorize them for you and get them tighter into some place. So if you really wanted to lock onto something specific, you could.
Right, but for broadcast, right? Not just serving it up to you so that you can kind of read what happened,
Gotcha.
Because then you really on your own could just search the hashtag.
Sure.
But it's a tool to actually stream that information. So
what kind of qualification process are they going to use to acknowledge people who will be able to use this?
Well, you've got to definitely be some type of a media outlet. So, I'm sure aside from the big guys, I guess if you're a small media outlet, there's going to be some kind of a vetting process to determine if they really are
standards.
Yeah, if they really are fitting in that category. So, the other thing that I found that was really interesting is just letting people know to really tweak the Twitter recommend feature. So on your website, and we see this a lot with folks who have blogs, if you're on a particular blog and you see a great article and you want to share it, a lot of people have this set up so that you can tweet the article or tweet the little segment or that quote that just really stands out in the article. And when you do that, if you make sure you're changing the code depending on which application you're using or plugin, you can give a message to your followers to then follow you on Twitter, right? So if I'm looking at something, I can share this great quote on Twitter, but it's that second step of, oh, by the way, since you're still here on my site, why don't you like my content, why don't you go ahead and follow me? So there's just some great widgets and plugins that can do that, but make sure you're looking at the HTML code, because a lot of times the code makers will put their own Twitter account in there, right? So here, you just shared that tweet, now follow, widget plugin application number 2 versus the actual person using it. So I thought that was kind of an interesting piece as well. Now, the one tool that I am most intrigued about is Periscope. And I was really hoping that we could test it out today. But unfortunately, right now, it is only released as an Apple product, and I don't have an iPhone. And I could not find an iPad application. So I'm guessing that they're just not there yet. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what Periscope is. And I just find the whole thing incredibly fascinating. What I wanted to do, it'll be a little long, and I'll make sure that we have this on the screen for folks to be able to see this. But I want to read just kind of the paragraph about what the Periscope folks are saying about the product. And let me step back and say that Periscope is a tool that allows you to live stream immediately to Twitter. So for example, if I had an iPhone, which I don't, I have an Android, I would be able to use Periscope to click record, send out a message to everyone that follows me on Twitter to say we are starting to live stream this digitally speaking show. And then people would have the ability to tweet back, to like the content, so we could have this entire real-time experience. So I'm going to, bear with me, I'm going to read this paragraph. This is from Periscope. Just over a year ago, we became fascinated by the idea of discovering the world through someone else's eyes. What if you could see through the eyes of a protester in Ukraine, or watch the sun rise from a hot air balloon in Cappadocia? It may sound crazy, but we wanted to build the closest thing to teleportation. While there are many ways to discover events and places, we realized there is no better way to experience a place right now than through live video. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but live video can take you someplace and show you around. I just thought that just got me. I thought that was very, very cool. So, as I mentioned before, Periscope lets you share your experiences with the world. Whether we're in a studio, whether we are witnessing the All-Star Game in Cincinnati in July, whatever it is, we can shoot that out for everybody to see instantly. Now, I want to hear your opinion on this, and then I want to share a problem that has already arisen.
Well, I'm laughing because one of my favorite comedians, and it's corny, but Jim Carrey had a movie with a very similar premise. The Truman Show. Remember?
Oh, I love the Truman Show.
It was great because it literally was his life, and it was.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
You couldn't tell whether it was reality or whether it was virtual or whether or not, and it's a very similar premise to that movie story. But it is interesting. I'm waking up this morning, and here he is. He wakes up, and everybody's watching him on the big. And it was great, and it's kind of like that's kind of the brave new world and where we're all ending up, because as we get followers and as we build these networks and these platforms keep coming online, et cetera, and people have more interest in things, that we're pulling ourselves further and further away from typical broadcasting and networks. And this is the sociological aspect of social media that we talk about all the time, and what kind of impact it's going to play in people's lives and in the world in general, and how people live and how they change. And so it's going to be very, very interesting to see, again, I always stress this point, but to me, this is one of the most fascinating things about this, is how it's going to impact all of our lives in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And because this has all happened so incredibly fast, all this great stuff and all these great applications, as people figure out these things to solve not necessarily issues or problems for people, but giving people all these options and opportunities to do things. And whether it be on a personal level or a professional level, it's just tremendous, the amount of information we're able to. Now I'm just waiting, for the increased hard drive. to be able to assimilate all this information. I make this joke all the time. I go, I'm still more hyper than my computer. I'm still more hyper than my machine. It's not working fast enough for me, you know, faster, faster, faster. So, you know, at some point, this stuff's going to speed up so much, it'll overtake our ability to be able to move that fast.
Yeah.
You know, so interesting stuff.
Well, what's going to happen is you're going to have all kinds of problems, potential problems that will come out of these things. So this is totally hot off the press from this morning. An article flew by one of my social media networks, and the title of the article is "Large-Scale Game of Thrones Leak Has HBO Targeting Periscope Streams." So basically, Game of Thrones is a huge show. They just had their season opener just this past Sunday night. I read that there were 8 million people viewing that episode. So what was happening was folks who have Periscope were live streaming their TV set, and so broadcasting the show out there, and so that kind of gets into copyright infringements, and
sure.
And so basically, the HBO folks issued kind of a cease and desist and pull down our content off of Twitter, you Periscope folks. But so, you know, this is just something that's happening right now. And I think that you have potential for, you know, the privacy issues. What if you decide to live stream some personal stuff that's going on? And you know, and we see that with crime too, with the recent incident where somebody videotaped a police officer shooting someone.
Absolutely.
So that there's lots of stuff that can happen.
Lots of stuff to it, but it's always fascinating here at Digitally Speaking with all this great stuff, and we're always trying to keep everybody hot on the latest topics and
informed,
yes, and very well informed. And I'm really excited because 22 has always been a magic number for me. So 22 is a great number for this episode, and as always, we're you know, trying to stay on top of everything here. And there's so many topics that are going to be coming forward into the brave new world, if you will, that we're always going to try to keep everyone abreast on. But I kind of want to take this opportunity to say this has just been such a blast to do the show with you, Michelle, and I want to make a special note that the folks here at ACTV, Nikki, who is our producer, and you can't see her right now because she's behind the scenes and she's spinning knobs and turning buttons and working lights, but she's just been incredible, has been our producer here at this show, and so I just want to thank her for all her hard work. And of course Shane, who's back behind the engineering, and he's also tweaking knobs and making sure that the broadcast gets squeezed down into a nice little fiber optic file to get out to the viewing audience. And Andy Crusser, who is also usually our floor director, is not here today, but we also want to thank Andy because without these folks, this show wouldn't be possible. And so Digitally Speaking is a fun show. It's just been really, really great. And we always want to thank the viewing audience for being loyal and tuning into us. And we're going to continue to bring you the greatest stuff, hottest topics, and all the great stuff.
Yeah, and again, a wonderful, wonderful thank you to the folks here at ACTV because they do an absolutely fantastic job. And this has been fun.
It's great.
Mark and I talking about Digitally Speaking and bringing all of that information to you.
So be on the lookout for us in the future here, and thank you once again for joining us here at Digitally Speaking.